Greetings, everyone. It is the 28th of May, and this is the People-Centered Internet Forum. Delighted to have you with us. Today, our guest speaker is, and a featured guest, is Nagy Hanna. And Nagy is an expert on digital economy, national innovation, smart cities, and public and business digital transformation strategies. He has been with the World Bank and still consults with and advises the World Bank. He's worked with public, private, and civil society leaders to promote digitally enabled innovation and transformation in various economic sectors and geographic regions. So he was the world's first senior advisor on digital economy. He's going to talk to us today about development in the digital age, leading and driving digital transformation. I'm sure he'll tell us more about his background as his remarks proceed. I do want to let you know that today, my co-host for this session is Schneider Alfonso. Everybody knows Schneider. There are some things going on here that are going to take my attention away in the middle of the session. So you're in good hands with Schneider. And Nagy, we're delighted to have you with us. I'll turn the program over to you now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate very much the opportunity to meet friends and new friends online. And I would like to thank the PCI leadership that had arranged for me this opportunity. I would like to suggest that my discussion will be really, or my presentation will be mainly about some elements of two books that have just been published, and I'm trying to get the whole thing started. Okay. So my three levels or three aspects of transformation is, for me personally, as a development practitioner who gained appreciation of the role of information and communication in development and the impact of technology on the various aspects of information and communication role in development. Partly conditioned or affected by the fact that I was born in Egypt, and I saw a lot of problems with the scarcity of information and information poverty, which often penalizes the small enterprises, the poor and lower middle class in trying to access government services and so on. I will say a few words on the country learning to transform, using some examples of countries that I knew relatively well compared to other countries that I studied, but I did not interact with as much. So I will touch on India and Sri Lanka as two interesting examples. Then I will like throughout to touch on the World Bank learning to respond, and it's the World Bank reaction, especially at the management level, to engaging in digital transformation in developing countries. Just, I don't want to repeat in my introduction to the introduction to me. It was done fairly well by Kevin. So I just wanted to say, out of the many years I dealt with development, at least 30 years of these were focused on digital economy, digital transformation of all kinds, and the ICT industry. And I tried to sum up some of that in the two books that are just been published and highly recommended to you: Economic Development in the Digital Age and Driving Digital Transformation in Developing Nations, mainly concrete case studies at the country level, at the government level, and societal level more broadly. As I started my knowledge in this area, I started with a task force that I convened. It was unofficial task force in the sense that it was not endorsed necessarily by bank management at the higher level, but my immediate manager was interested in it as well. And this was really a voluntary work that we met over lunch for many months to try to articulate what information technology is doing to development or could do to development. And the people who were convening in this area were people from the databases in the World Bank, the information technology specialists, telecom specialists, people working in education, health, agriculture, and so on, infrastructure, who saw that this is an important area that the bank need to focus on. In the end, we summarized that into a manifesto of the staff for management, saying the information, the role of the World Bank in the information age, and how the bank should become more proactive in this area. And to bolster or to strengthen that arguments that were made in this manifesto and its implications for the bank, I did a study in conjunction with one or two colleagues from University of Maryland to see what information technology components are in the World Bank lending. And Anil Srivastava was very encouraging about this because it was demonstrating clearly that the bank is already doing a lot in lending to ICT. However, it was not explicitly managed or appropriately supervised. And the problem with that is that it ended up being more of ad hoc applications in various sectors, but it was not leveraged enough to diffuse throughout the country. So we ended up basically having a few staff reacting to country requests for a component for management information system or computerization of banking or computerization of a specific enterprise or the infrastructure or the ports and so on. But it were not adding up into a major impact on diffusing these applications throughout the country. However, they added up in terms of lending to about 8 to 10% of the bank portfolio. But because they were buried as components of projects and were not familiar to the bank management, it was ignored. It was not strategically managed. And the result is that also that did not openly or strategically focusing on the most important areas of the economy for that country. It was really more standard solutions. And the result is that when we tried to present the findings to management, they were quite surprised that the bank is already in this field, because typically the management at the time, typical action was to say, we are really not in this area, leave it to the private sector, or that we don't have a comparative advantage in this area, or that it is not as clearly connected to poverty alleviation. So the result is that these presentations that we made to senior management did not raise curiosity, but did not lead to as much attention in practice to this area. And this led to an important intervention by the Independent Evaluation Department of the World Bank and Accounting Association or accounting group that deals with accountability of the World Bank management to the board and to the top management. And they basically postponed, said that we already, some people even expressed the fact that that was 1990, 1992. They said that the board, that said to the board that, well, the World Bank has missed the boat. That's 1992. Already they felt that this is moving very fast and the bank was not responding very quickly. Then I had the opportunity to work with Anil and a number of other staff in India, the Software Export Association, or what's called NASCOM, the software companies that does services They are usually composed of very large companies as well as small companies with a combination of both. And at that time, the exports from India to the world was very modest. It was about 130, 140 million software services annually. However, we felt that, and NESCOM in particular felt that there is a major opportunity in India to do software exports. And India at the time was actually having even a balance of payment crisis for exports, and they were very eager to try to exploit information technology services to other countries, and particularly to Europe and the US. Interestingly, if you look back at this modest study that covered about $1 or $2 million study, if you look at it today and see what the export of India to software services, it increased from 130 million annually to 192 billion per year in 2022. So it constituted about 20% of total exports of India today. Many lessons can be learned from this, but just briefly, it was a partnership that was led mostly by NESCOM and was using the World Bank more to bring credibility and confidence in the study results, and to begin to link it to the kind of reforms that are needed to promote the software industry in India for export. Later, I took advantage of this proposal, of these findings, to try to get the World Bank attention, senior management attention, to use the software capability of India, not only to serve exports, but to serve the domestic market, and particularly to apply it to the private sector, to the public sector, to the societal applications of various kinds, to servicing the common man and common woman. And interestingly, by doing so, we thought that we can get attention at the senior level of government to begin to leverage this capability for domestic market, because it was really primarily driven by the private sector for export at the time. And several ministries actually subscribed to the opportunity to deal with this area in a more comprehensive way with the World Bank. The proposal, just to be short on that point, the proposal that came out from my colleagues and I went to a decision meeting by the country director at the time, who basically objected to have it in the lending program or to advise on that, to get the bank involved. They thought it was a small operation, a boutique operation at the time when India program in the bank was focusing more on balance of payment issues. They did not think that the director who chaired the meeting dismissed also that any comprehensive approach to digital transformation in the country will be hampered by the relatively troubled at that time electricity infrastructure, the fact that there are more priorities in the case of India, that perhaps this is an area that may be considered in the future, but not at that time. And the result is that, frankly, we ended up losing an opportunity of having the software leveraged to the benefit of the overall domestic market and to the overall development strategy of India. And in retrospect, India went after that in a farther way. In a decade or two, India was in a position, frankly, to teach the World Bank and many other countries the use of information technology for digital transformation. However, the fact that the bank did not at that time engage was a loss, really, much more to the World Bank to be able to disseminate these kind of experiences and to work in a collaborative way with a client, the relatively leading client, to be able to leverage that knowledge and that partnership for the benefit of many other countries. I don't know why it is cutting off the, sorry. Sri Lanka case is at the top. This somehow is cut off, but basically we in around 2002, in a sense almost a decade later, I got engaged with the CIO of the World Bank to do a comprehensive approach to digital transformation for Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister originally came, so Jim Wolfenson, who was the president at the time of the World Bank, and asked for the Prime Minister asked for bank assistance to help develop the software industry and applying software technology and ICT to the private sector and particularly to government services. The CIO, Muhammad Mohsin, at the time was quite interested and took advantage of this opportunity to ask me to take the lead in developing that program in collaboration with Sri Lankan colleagues. Country at that time was aspiring to emulate India in its successful software and to emulate some of the more advanced clients, states like Ahmedabad, which the state of Ahmedabad, because it was already doing something related to access of government services to with the power of information technology. Anyway, the upshot of this is that the bank response originally was to resist the bureaucracy, particularly in the bank, even though it was supported by Jim Wolfenson. He left it ultimately up to the bank management to try to develop or to respond to the Sri Lankan request. Interestingly enough, they allowed us to go to Sri Lanka for a visit, and here I mean the regional management of Sri Lanka at the World Bank, and they allowed us to go on a visit to advise, but they suggested for us not to come back with a project because they felt that again it doesn't fit in the lending program. They have to delay including it maybe for 3 to 5 years. They have a program for lending that they didn't want to change and so on. Anyway, a lot of excuses from the bureaucracy. However, the enthusiasm of the Sri Lankan government at the time for leveraging the experience of India and their own talented software engineers to be able to develop this program. It took a lot of groundwork to pilot, to try to demonstrate that this is an area that is not that somehow can demonstrate that it will add value to the country. There was a skepticism about that both in Sri Lanka as well as in the bank, but these pilots, particularly ones that were targeted to try to demonstrate the importance of digital technology for some of the key issues that were facing the country. These helped create a receptive environment. On top of that, we thought that it is important to start upfront with the creation of a national ICT agency, was called ECTA. And the reason for focusing on that is because there was really no home for the area of digital transformation in the country. There were several ministries that could claim that they have some role to play in this area. So we focused on institution building for 2-3 years, on piloting and in preparing the country to be more effective, the counterparts to be more effective in working with the bank and other consultants to advise or formulate the digital and integrated digital transformation program. In the end, the project was approved by the board of the World Bank. This is the executive boards of the World Bank. And it was chaired at that time by Jim Wilkinson, who made some memorable remarks, including that he waited, I waited for 10 years to have a project like that. In many ways, he was very encouraging that this is really something that he wanted very much to do or to have the bureaucracy do, but there was really no clear home for it within the bank structure or bank bureaucracy. There was a unit for telecom separately, but that unit did not envisage doing this kind of broad integrated digital transformation programs. So we were lucky, I certainly was lucky, to ultimately found a demonstration project that can ultimately be emulated in a number of other countries by the World Bank, with countries that are interested in it, like Moldova or like Ghana and so on, different levels of development. So ultimately, the major, in my view, the major impact of this was to create the institutions that are necessary for more continuous transformation and not see this as a one-shot affair, or that's something that can be just done in a year or two. So this is the strategies. I don't know if you are seeing the whole heading or not, because I am only seeing the heading cut a bit. So
I think we can see it complete. It says diversity of country digital strategy.
Okay, thank you, because I can't see it here. Anyway, the important thing here is that I went back to, after, in this case, after I left the World Bank and at the end, near retirement, and decided to spend more time researching how other countries have been doing, pursuing digital transformation. And there were many choices that countries have caught: the scope of the digital development program in the country, the time horizon, would it be for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? How much of it is being driven by the public sector, how much by the private? What is the relationship between the two? How much top-down, how much bottom-up shaping of the program? How much emphasis there is on inclusion and evaluation and learning? In general, I found that, and this was ultimately published, I found that the weaker points were evaluation and inclusion. Many of the borrower countries or the leading countries in this area, or experimenting in this area, the pioneering countries, were much more concerned about inclusion in rhetoric, but really not in practice, because inclusion, especially in highly unequal economy, can be very difficult to pursue. And the same thing with evaluation. Often evaluation was much more focused on the hardware and software, and less on the institution building and ultimately the benefits and the results in terms of transforming services. The other area where it was really important is to link digital transformation programs to the overall development strategy of the country. So we're not really more about only connectivity or only physical access to information, or only about access to digital government programs. It was a lot more about addressing the broader sustainable development goals and aligning the digital strategy to the development strategy of the country. We did a lot of studies in this area. I collaborated with a number of co-authors on several of these studies, usually co-authors who were interested as well as quite knowledgeable about their country, as well as about information technology. And some of these studies enlightened other countries that came later and have been published in a number of books. Here, Peter probably is there. Peter Knight was one of them. Lucy Abraham from South Africa was another, and so on. The main lesson we learn is that there are many choices, not one size fits all, and there is a rich agenda for research that in this area, because we don't have as much research on the country experiences. We often have it focused on one single technology or one single part of the application of digital technology, more at the micro level. Otherwise, I see here I don't know why it is freezing. Oh, here it is. I'm generalizing from this the importance of looking at the whole digital transformation ecosystem. So far, many of the countries and the bank, for that matter, and other aid agencies have focused more on or only on the digital access, particularly to the internet, which is legitimate and very important. However, access alone does not produce the developmental impact that developing countries are seeking. They also need to emphasize or deal with the digital policies, cybersecurity, building the trust in the use of electronic transactions, building e-leadership institutions that coordinate investment and policies in the country, building capabilities of the user sector and of the citizens at large, developing the digital public infrastructure, the data infrastructure, the digital ID, the e-payment system. Many of these are horizontal or foundations for the digital economy, and a focus on them together is very important at the ecosystem level, because the interaction between them is important and is necessary to reap most of the benefits that are needed from having digital access. Of course, the sector, the state, plays different roles from the business or the private sector and civil society. And again, the relationship between the state, the business, and civil society is quite important, both to ensure not only innovation from the private sector, building trust in the internet from the public sector, but also ensuring that the civil society is engaged in this area, including universities, because it is, again, very important that we ensure access to the communities and to the poor communities in particular, and to ensure relevant local content. And a lot of that is important through the participation of the civil society. I also think that digital transformation is not purely a technical or technology only process. It is as much a socio-political process, and it requires mobilizing a shared vision for the society for digital transformation and the role of digital information technology in supporting the overall development and empowering the various stakeholders. Sometimes it requires even a crisis to be able to motivate and bring consensus within a society to take digital transformation more seriously. As a process, as a social process, as a political process, digital transformation involves continuity of communication, broader ownership, managing the expectations that this technology is not going to change prospects of development overnight. It requires sustainability. It requires mobilizing stakeholders and at times diaspora, when it is a significant part of the talent of the country is abroad, and building networks among the CIOs. So ultimately, it's a social political process that needs to be attended to where technology is only one element of that. What does it mean for aid agencies? That's my last slides, I guess. One is that the agencies need to address some of the challenges that have hampered the advance of digital transformation assistance. One is digital transformation is cross-cutting, and yet many of the aid bureaucracies tend to be either one silo specific dealing with this area, or it has no room across the whole bureaucracy. And it is important both in the bank and as well in other aid agencies, and certainly in regional development banks, is to begin to deal with these things in a cross-sectoral way and to break the silos between those who are dealing with ICT and telecom and so on, and between those who are working to enable health systems or agriculture or rural development or education systems and so on. Many of these user sectors, as you will call them users, the areas of applications have to be actively engaged in the formulation of these programs and be ensuring that the broader labor horizontal or enabling infrastructure across all sectors is in place as well. Leadership of the institutions is very critical, and is a huge difference between some of the leaders at the World Bank, for example, where Jim Wolfenson advanced some of this agenda significantly at his time. Currently, there is a new president of the World Bank who seems to be quite active and interested in this area, and have just recently announced the creation of a digital vice presidency dedicated to digital transformation. So there are hope for accelerating the process and for cutting across the barriers of hierarchy, of short-termism, and of pressures to lend, which tend sometimes to make lending to digital technology less attractive to those who are only focusing about a bigger bank rather than a better bank. And ultimately, another common area of interest that that aid agencies need is to ensure governance across all sectors, to ensure that incentives are in place for staff to take the risks and to learn about this area in a way that is integrated into the overall development of the country. And as I said, reforms are possible, and in fact, they are even more urgent, and we can debate that in our discussion. Thank you very much. I appreciate very much listening and this opportunity to share with you. And sorry for rushing, otherwise a very long agenda. Any questions or any comments, please? Who is moderating this? Are we talking to Schneider?
Yeah, I think Kevin is not here, right? Yeah,
Yes.
so we are starting.
That you will take care of it.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Nagy, for the whole explanation and the presentation. And we will start the discussion with Mike, that now has his raised hand. So Mike, the mic is yours.
Nagy, thank you so much for sharing lessons learned over the 35 years that you've been working on digital development. As you know, I was in the White House in the Clinton years, and I had many of the same experiences you did. I still remember going over to the World Bank in 1993 and making an impassioned plea for 1% for internet. And the condescending answer I got was, well, Dr. Nelson, do you really think that the web is more important than water and sewage and electricity? And I came back and I said, do you really think that you could, do you think you could make any better investment than making sure the internet was there to provide communication for the other 99% of your budget. And in some cases, they've been able to double or triple the effectiveness of programs outside of the digital arena simply by providing the most basic internet connection. But there was huge resistance to doing anything new. But I'm glad that you and people like Carlos Braga just kept hitting their heads against the wall and were able to hide the money in various places so that you could make a difference. But I had two quick questions. I've done a lot in this area, and in the 90s and early 2000s, one of the biggest problems was corruption. And I'm curious whether you think the World Bank has done enough to use information technology to fight corruption, particularly in the telecommunications ministries. I mean, India was famous for some of these huge cases where communication ministers and the people who worked for them were taking massive bribes in the allocation of spectrum and licenses for operations in broadcasting as well as wireless. Any suggestions on how we might tackle this? Because in too many countries, we're just seeing a lot of wasted investment, money that goes for licenses and ends up in the Cayman Islands or unmarked bank accounts somewhere else. So a very complicated question, but first off, any way to use these technologies to fight corruption? Do you have any sense that we're doing a better job in preventing corruption in this sector?
Thank you so much. May I answer right away? Okay, because these are rich questions. I mean, that's a fairly challenging one. So let me try to say 2-3 points. One is that some of the bank managers, in reaction to the fact that ICT often invites corruption in some form, or at least it's an easy way to have a big chunk of the big corruption, not the small ones.
Whenever you're allocating a scarce resource,
yeah,
it invites corruption. Yeah.
So their reaction was to say, so let's not lend to that area. Let's get out of it, which is obviously, in my view, the wrong reaction. I mean, we have to struggle with all forms of corruptions in different areas. And I think, I mean, there is no one single, what can I say, remedy, but I would say sometimes it is the best important thing is to try to lobby or to build coalitions against corruption in certain areas that are felt strongly about. I mean, in the case of telecom, was relatively more liberalized and in India, and in many ways they reformed the telecom sector and so on, and that was in part was due to pressure by the software industry, because they wanted this better international communication and local communication to be able to export and to be able to advance their own sector. So sometimes it comes indirectly from the users or from the potential beneficiaries. And one of the key lessons I learned, frankly, is that the bank and purely external pressure has a limit. In a sense, it's important to do some of that, but it has a limit, particularly in large countries that are not as dependent, frankly, on the donors or the World Bank to do that. So for them, the important way is to try to get ownership of the issue locally or domestically, and use that as the basis for pressuring the telecom reform or reducing corruption I'm not aware of studies myself, but I'm sure there must have been studies to show that e-government services delivery, particularly the use of Aadhaar, has had an impact on corruption. But again, it cannot be purely technical solution. Unfortunately, maybe this is happening at a time when the perception of increased corruption in India may be coming back, or at least leave that to the Indians to make a judgment about that. But in my view, it is not purely a technical solution. It requires, because there will always be clever people to game the system and to find ways around it. Sorry for the long answer to a very complex question.
Well, thank you for a very specific and helpful answer. And thanks again for all the work you continue to do.
You are, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for the question. And we have two questions on the chat, and one of those is from Dr. Ron Suarez. So, Dr. Ron, the mic is yours.
Thank you. First, Nagy, thank you for a very impressive presentation. It was very inspiring for me. I'm currently focused on the United States, but ultimately the principles that we're trying to promote are global. And we are small. I started a nonprofit very recently. And with the help of artificial intelligence, based on all the things I've written that I uploaded to it, AI helped me to come up with the tagline, transform the digital divide into digital dividends. And as a brown person, I have somewhat resented, while I think things like the Affordable Connectivity Program to give money to people to connect are important, I've resented what I see as the undue emphasis on that versus helping minorities to run their own enterprises. So how do you think we can make a case for the societal return on investment of government investments in local community-owned internet networks rather than funding the incumbent monopolies?
It's a very good question, and also very common challenge in many ways. It's and not only in developed countries, of course, in developing countries, perhaps even more, given the opportunity, the opportunity cost of reinforcing otherwise a will-to-do and big monopolies at the expense of the rest of the economy and society. I don't know if I will address how far I can address this. I can only suggest that since I was emphasizing one point about the fact that digital transformation is a societal issue and is a political process issue. So in the same spirit, I would argue that you need to build coalition among SMEs, for example, the small and medium enterprises, to have a voice in setting policies. And here I mean particularly for aid agencies like the World Bank and regional development banks and the bilateral aid and so on, is that to make sure in the leadership institutions, the digital leadership institutions, the Ministry of ICT or Ministry of Digital Transformation, would have, call them consultative process, or a way to ensure that the voice of the rural communities, the NGOs that represent them, the small and medium enterprises and so on, can be able to put their voice and have channels to emphasize their own concerns about this. And that requires investment in the capability of these NGOs and capability of the small and medium enterprise associations and so on, so that they can be able to argue the case for why monopolies and why their share of whatever subsidies or stimulus or policies, broader policies, will be important to ensure a wider diffusion and a wider, benefit for those who are otherwise less represented and who typically tend to not be excluded from these consultations process and policy formulation processes. And I found that the diversity of stakeholders being represented in the process of managing a project in digital transformation. Enriches the options, but also helps improve equality or reduce increasing inequality in the country. I don't know if that applies as much to the US. I have only consulted very briefly in the US, but I think the political process in the US needs as much infusion of input from the smaller players and modifying or distributing benefits much more broadly to society. So I would imagine that applies to countries at all levels of development.
Yeah, my questions are like general economic questions, because I think that internet for all floats everyone's boat. So I'm curious your thoughts on like low interest loans for community-owned internet networks. I think that in the long run, that local communities can be profitable with this.
I think it's one of the good vehicles that can be used, but I think it really will vary by country, to be honest, in the sense to see where the bottleneck is for accessing the benefits, whether it comes from lack of access or lack of bargaining power or lack of of skills and other things to deploy. I mean, in a sense, going beyond access alone. I mean, I understand access is the crucial barrier, and in the case of developing countries, it's even much more because of affordability and usability are limited. And even if you have a digital access, in many countries, they have the cover relatively done well, do coverage of access, but they at the same time they did not improve the informational capability of communities and small and medium enterprises to be able to benefit from access alone without having the skills, without having the relevant content, without having fair competition in vis-a-vis the larger players, without giving more chances to the small enterprises, software enterprises to access the development of government services and so on. There are many vehicles that needs to be looked at, and it depends on the country level of development and priority to be able to whether you do that through subsidies, because once you argue about subsidies, also you can have a lot of other people say, oh, but you need subsidies for housing, you need subsidy for all kind of other needs. And you get into an engagement about whether this is the best way of using government funds, or whether as an enabler to many other areas and access to other areas, or whether there are many other priorities that are basic for subsidies or necessary for subsidies.
In the US, you get the comment that the US government shouldn't be subsidizing people sitting at home watching high definition porn on broadband networks.
Well, unfortunately, that is a temptation that is common across many countries, among individuals anyway. And just going back on that point, Korea, when they had a very high level of internet penetration in the early 90s, by that time was relatively very one of the top countries being networked and so on. When there was not as much relevant content and relevant applications, a lot of the use of internet was for porno. So,
yep.
I mean, but gradually, as they targeted more and more development for the use for developing content and for the creating markets for content that is relevant to development, there is a need for partnership between the public and the private sector to do that, so that it doesn't end up being primarily for gambling or for pornos.
Yeah, well, in Korea now, more than 1% of the young males have been clinically diagnosed as being addicted to video games. And in some cases, having to go to special camps or enter into some kind of treatment program. It's a problem that doesn't get discussed enough because there's a lot of
It
lost
doesn't.
productivity when that happens.
It doesn't, and frankly, I neglected myself to talk about the darker side because I have plenty to say about it as well. But my feeling is that this is, again, should be part of the political process, but the social process, not just the political, and the caring of schools and families and so on, to be able to develop that. One vehicle was used in a country or another, I can't remember, I think it was Sri Lanka, where the having kiosks where you can share access to data and information and applications, encourage help. Teachers were even involved sometimes in managing or in even investing in this kiosk access in the country, or sometimes it was even sponsored by the what you call it, the religious organizations that were caring about the youth and so on. So there are other ways of trying also to get social control or social pressure to help the young kids from using internet only for useless stuff and to use it more for education and for other purposes.
Thank you, Nagy and Dr. Ronan, Mike, for the notes. And I think that now this is kind of going aligned with the topic now in youth. It's kind of aligned with our next person because Mark Prinsky has his hand up. So Mark, you go.
Thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Hanna, for that great historical thing. You were a pioneer in bringing a lot of this stuff together. And building on what Snyder just said, I think almost everybody on this call, except for Snyder maybe, or barely, is from what I call the second millennium, right? We were from the times when there was no digital, there was no all this kind of stuff. That's when we grew up. And then we were pioneers, most of us, in bringing it to the world. Now we're in a new millennium, and we have young people who are starting to grow up, and they're going to be running the world. And my question to you is, do you see a difference in perspective if in the what I'll call third millennium people and younger people who are moving into power or who are getting things? And the second part of that question is, if you were 25 again, what would you, we all want to be 25 again, but what would you be working on and recommend that everybody here be working on and talking to people, to especially to the younger people, about?
Wow. You guys all have very difficult questions. And I can learn a hell of a lot from you guys about it, because it is really, again, it is the kind of things that require judgment within the context of a country. That's not trying to avoid answer, but I wanted to just suggest two things. One is that if we have the current crop of bank in the World Bank, for example, staff, if I had them, earlier, I think a lot of the hurdles that we face may have been reduced significantly. I think we are having a lot more chance now with the younger people involved to, as managers, not just as users, but as managers of in aid agencies and so on, middle management in particular. I think we will be entertaining a lot more interesting things than trying to get the buy-in and to get the top management and middle management not to stop assistance to the country, because this is not as relevant to the development process and the way we understand it and so on, and the fear actually of taking risks in this area. So I think the generational change is important. Having said that, I have to also say I worry about some of the excesses of the young generation in in the use of technology that is isolating them, and in many ways not using it for the kind of developmental impact type of activities. If I were 25 years ago, I wish I'm dreaming about it increasing more and more, because I think there is new opportunities coming up. I think the fact that that one of the first things that the Ajay, the new president of the World Bank, asked for is that he is establishing a vice president level, global vice president level for digital. That we only a year or two ago, the digital transformation department was created, and maybe I had an opportunity to appeal at that time to the management CEO before she left the bank to be the head of IMF. That's Georgieva, Kristalina Georgieva, that created the department for digital technology or digital development. Now it's going to be a vice president level, and that's really the highest among the various global practices. I'm only saying that not because it's already achieved much. The process has just started in this area by a new president, and you need that kind of leadership to cut across the silos that exist today in the bank and other aid agencies that are very much siphons or silos by sector or by issue or whatever have you. And any cross-cutting area like environment or poverty alleviation across the board or digital transformation tend to have difficult time unless there is pressure from outside. So one of the things that happened more recently is the increasing attention to environment as a sector and as an enabler to live in a lively planet. So it is part of the mission of aid agencies in more and more. So sometimes the pressure from outside, in this case, came a lot of it from NGOs and maybe to some extent political leadership, but particularly NGOs in the past, is beginning to help restructure aid agencies to cut across silos. And the same thing can happen in digital transformation, but I'm not so sure to what extent the digital industry in developing countries or even globally is actively interested and actively learning about what does it mean digital transformation for developing countries? What does it mean for advancing sustainable development goals? They need to become more active in this and credible vis-a-vis the aid agencies, bureaucracies, so that this becomes much more than just rhetoric and it's not easy for these bureaucracies to change unless there is stakeholders outside pressing in on the executive directors of these institutions, as well as on the top leadership of these institutions. And I can't be afraid of being fired because I have already been fired anyway from the World Bank. So I can freely talk about this. And by the way, some of my colleagues here who are, I have to acknowledge, particularly, Anis Srivastava, because he was one of the early people who taught me about societal applications and the importance of ICT in development more broadly. And I was using that enthusiasm to try to do that within the World Bank for whatever good or evil or ill. And also Peter Knight, because he also collaborated with me on various case studies of countries. And there are many, many other still minority, in my view, colleagues from the World Bank who helped contribute a lot to my thinking and to my research. And I am grateful to also those within India and Sri Lanka, because they are in the ones that I've learned from the most or over longer time for what I learned from them about how digital transformation is a core area of development, and that we need to take it much more seriously than we have done in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It sounds to me like there's a huge need for a transformation, not just digital, but a transformation of a lot of these big institutions from the second millennium, like the World Bank and other things, to a new perspective of for the times that we live in. And my question is, do you think that how likely is that to happen, and how long will that take to happen before institutions like the World Bank are really focused on the world of the third millennium?
I wish I could say more on that, but I have to tell you on the positive side, I think many of the earlier issues related to is digital chips any different from potato chips? That was one of the exclamations by a macroeconomist at the World Bank when I was trying to convince them that we need to address this issue. There is a lot of change has happened. Just maybe some of us are impatient with that, given the fact that there is a sense of urgency, that there is many crises in the developing countries and in the world at large with the climate and so on. So I think they are reformable in my view. Some of it is generational, but some of it is leadership within the institutions that can make a big difference. The World Bank is very hierarchical, and so is many other aid agencies, I guess. I worked for, or I did consulting with Asian Development Bank and African Development Bank and so on, and they are even more hierarchical than the World Bank, which is difficult for me to fathom. But anyway, and it makes a huge difference when the leaders of the institution can, or for that matter, the governing board that represent the various countries on the board of this institution, when they can press on the institution to become whatever third millennium or second millennium, to at least accelerate their learning capacity to deal with the fast pace of technological change that's happening. And I wish there is that fire in the belly or the eagerness of aid agencies to do what the entrepreneurs try to do for money. So, I mean, these are very serious issues that facing the world, and there is a rising inequality. Yes, there is a lot of progress on access to transport, access to the internet and applications, and the promised power of artificial intelligence and so on. But there's also problems even within that progress on access, because many of the countries that have relatively advanced their access are not getting necessarily what was promised in terms of the impact of that on the functions of their institutions or advancing their sustainable development goals. In fact, there has been a setback because of the COVID and many other issues, and the politicizing sometimes of the development process in many countries. That there is a retrenchment, and of course there is a lot of competition for foreign aid, given the crisis in a number of countries, immigration, all kind of stuff that suggests that we can't be complacent about this, and that there is a need for, however painful sometimes, the adjustment, however changes in the skills, acquiring new skills, changing the mix of skills of the staff and so on. They require sometimes pain as well as leadership. And in my view, we can't afford to be complacent about it, because it is engulfing the whole world, and many of the things that we have achieved in the digital transformation still have a very long agenda to go to the next stage. I mean, when you look at things like artificial intelligence, I didn't even touch on that. And you see, what is that an area where the institutions like the World Bank should be heavily involved in? There's a lot of excitement about it, but have we thought through also what the impact of that on the labor force and jobs in developing countries? How we can redress that while at the same time leveraging artificial intelligence for scarce expertise and for many advanced research applications that other people can speak on a lot better than me.
Thank you, Mark, for your question. And Nagy, just for everybody to know, we are already in the extra time. So we are going with the extra 30 minutes. And we have Suzanne and also Paul. So Suzanne, you have a question. You posted a question on the chat box. So if you want to share it right now, and then we go with Paul.
Oh, thank you so much, Steiner. Dr. Hanna, thank you so much for this presentation today, sharing your research, your publications. I'm looking forward to reading your publications and the studies that you've conducted. How fascinating. My question to you, Dr. Hanna, is which sector, I know all sectors play a huge role in digital transformation, but which sector in the immediate future do you see having the greatest potential for impact?
Well, that's a very good question, and I like very much that you raised it, because I feel, just judging from even the way applications of digital technology in the World Bank and where it went farthest and where it didn't, it was mostly focused on financial management, focused on public expenditure, focused on management information systems, particularly in the government, and was focused on the ICT as an industry or a sector, and telecom reform. But it was the least delivered on, in my view, was ICT for governance or digital governance. It is least developed, in my view, and it has the highest impact is in health and education. And the result of that is not only that you don't get the payoff for applying ICT to many other sectors, particularly in the case of education, but also it heightened or reinforced inequality in the context of developing countries, where there is a very high level of inequality in many of the poorer and middle-income countries. So I will focus on the sectors that are the most urgent from the point of view of equity and human development and sustainable development goals. These are the parts that I will focus on the most. Of course, there is now increasing attention to the environment and what information technology and transformation, digital transformation can do for smart cities or for smart infrastructure and so on. And I would say that, and of course, smart or livable environment. And I would say the most important thing here is that we be highly focused and specific on those areas that can make the most impact, even within the sector. So for example, in the case of health, there are many diseases and many areas where basic delivery of health is wanting, and a lot can be done in that area, rather than perhaps thinking of it more broadly without targeting it to the most pressing areas. But this is an area where I think somebody like Anis Srivastava can talk about it much more eloquently than me. So I wouldn't say much more than just more broadly. The same thing with education. I think education, particularly for the youngest kids, is going to make a huge difference now for the next generation, for the third millennia or whatever is being called. And needing investment in this area, in my view, will have a very high payoff for the countries, particularly in developing countries where there is a high rate of birth and even in developed countries, I would argue that it's probably artificial intelligence will be much more focused on the areas where it can augment the human capability rather than displace it completely. But that's easy said than done. We have to find policies that can help do that.
Thank you so much. Excellent.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Nagy. Paul, where was?
And he,
Hi.
come on, sorry.
Yeah, hi. I have two different comments. Your talk itself was a great ray of life. I found myself wishing that your talk could be propagated all over the world because you made some critical points that people need to get through their skull. That's the positive side. The negative side is I don't really see the solutions here at this point. The problems are very clear. Are the solutions with the stakeholder system? I think it's very important we should learn some of the lessons of history. Some of us have been deeply involved quietly in the climate politics. In fact, Mark and I have both been involved with a thing called the Millennium Project, which has been doing studies worldwide on the future job impacts of AI, but also on climate. And in the climate area, it has been overwhelming to me how much success we have had recently in drawing attention to the importance of climate change. It's more important than they know, but already they know it's important. But when I look at the solution process, the stakeholder process operating in all of the major countries of the world, the stakeholder process I have seen has led to distortions and filtering and to climate policies which do more harm than good. The science and technology is out there which would let us prevent human extinction and make money, but that's not what we're doing. We're falling into a deeper hole and we're throwing money away. And so the problem is, how do we get a process going so that the future of the internet doesn't get screwed up as badly as climate has been? Part of the answer is we need more serious information. It's very convenient for political and regulatory people to say, oh, it's not about science or technology. That's sort of a mantra I hear with climate. It's a mantra I hear with internet. My opinion is we cannot prevent human extinction from either of these routes unless we find a way to better use our science and technology knowledge at the top level. And ironically, one of the examples I think of, Sri Lanka. You mentioned the people who left the country. We now have a group working with our US-India technology groups who comes from Sri Lanka, who is one of our two best hopes of fundamental technology that can redesign the internet beyond what any of these people have any idea of. It's kind of amusing to be in touch daily with a guy from Sri Lanka who is on the positive side of reality. But then there's this political side of reality, and I don't know how do we connect to that.
Oh, I guess you are not asking me for a question. You are really making a very eloquent appeal.
Because the real question is, how do we stay alive? And you have given us an input to that. The question is, how do we follow up on it?
Yeah. Well, any volunteer to answer this question? I personally believe that we are at a critical stage for the future of mankind, and quite a bit of what is happening to the environment, but also to human beings. I mean, to the extent it's happening to democracy, is happening to the growing inequality and so on. On one hand, can lead to despair. On the other hand, can be seen as a motivation to bring about correction in the course And my hope is that there are some countries, it doesn't have to be the United States, but some countries can provide some attractive models of solutions and so on. And I think the more we can find examples of solutions or examples of how the countries have developed habitable urban environment or livable region or cooperation to address some of these global public goods in a better way will come about. It had to come about from showing some examples of countries that maybe have done it on a small scale compared to the large countries, which are much more complicated and so on. But even within large countries, there may be some cities that can do things have done things that are to make the environment much more livable. Or states, some of the states in India or in Sri Lanka, or in particularly in Brazil, for example, where there has been more advance in digital transformation at the state level than at the federal level or the national level. Again, it's a political process. You have to look for what is feasible and where to start demonstrating the impact of information technology or the likely impact of information technology on that specific country or that specific sector. We have to look for areas where it is, can give us more hope and more success. And by the way, that applies to the broader coverage of digital transformation process that I have mentioned earlier, is that the stakeholders ultimately are the ones who have to guide the process and hold the top leadership or the political leadership to account. And when it doesn't, some countries will learn faster than others. Hopefully, mankind as a whole will learn from each other quickly enough to be able to do that. I'm worried about the fact that international organizations also have been weakened by all kinds of political maneuvering of some countries or others. And that again, the more we weaken our international institutions as well, the more we are having problems. We'll have problems that cannot be managed at the local level and at the national level. I'm not answering. I invite others to answer questions because really.
Okay, I've got my hand up, so maybe I'll
Yeah.
speak.
Please.
Yeah, Brian, go ahead, Brian.
I'm relatively new. The way I'm going to answer Paul's question and Nagy, just tell you about my life. I'm working with Rotary International, comprised of 1.4 million members. They give 330 million away for sustainable projects, 46,000 clubs in 100 countries. And it's not a government. I don't think of it as a private. These are all nonprofit with service orientation. And that's what I'm doing with my life.
Thank
The
you for the
frustrating,
example.
and I've worked in major organizations. I'm a member of the Emeriti at UC Berkeley, so it's not like I haven't been around. But I think there's positive energy is good for all of your health, rather than getting frustrated with the frustrations we have talked about this morning, which are all real. So that's all that's my 2 cents.
Well, it's a very good point. I just wanted to add to it a small thing, which is basically I was talking about the World Bank or talking about a country level, but a lot of what can make a difference in life for us and ultimately for reform is the small associations. They are not that small, but still by comparison, I mean, the World Bank is lending currently about $100 billion annually. Investment and lending every year. Now, if you add to that what the regional development banks are doing, and some of them have gone increasingly larger, and including ones that have different membership, but than just the ones that are the World Bank. these add up to a significant amount. Yet, to my knowledge, there hasn't been as much interaction between the associations and between large aid agencies. I mean, I would have liked, I haven't heard, for example, that the Rotary group had interacted or piloted something together with the World Bank or the USAID or WHO or environmental agency, the Global Environmental Agency. So I'm just wondering to what extent part of the problem is also if we get excited about what's being done and we have good pilots or good models, we should be actively also building links between that and between organizations that may scale up that success on a larger level and provide complementary skills or complementary finance to support the committed individuals, because you can't substitute for the individual and small enterprise, small association enthusiasm for these kind of global issues. But you can find a way to link it so it can scale up and provide demonstration effect to other larger or global initiatives.
Well, I'll go back to your point about the hearts and the minds may have to come first, not the bank. Rotary claims, which I believe, to have virtually wiped out polio in the world. So it's not an insignificant force for change in these. This is a service club because it's not. Success is not measured by money.
Yeah. That's why we should also, when we seek about aid agencies like the World Bank, we should be focusing not about a bigger bank only, but about a better bank than the one that is driven more and more by the broader stakeholders' interests, including the planet.
Thank you, Brian. And we have one more comment or question from Pali that have his hand raised.
Well, hello, everybody. I think the problem is perhaps wider and deeper than just between some organization. I think the whole ecosystem within internet is very fragmented and there is no interaction with other institutions. I sit in the ALAC for ICANN, advisory board for ICANN, and I see very little interaction with other economic institutions. Even within the internet governance ecosystem itself, interactions are limited. And I think that's one of the key problems that we have. The global architecture that we have inherited have done a marvelous job. But right now, I think with digital situation, there is a lot of gaps and there is a need for a lot of linkages in various parts.
Thanks for your comment. It's extremely relevant, and one of the issues that I don't know if I covered it or not, but is basically the weak interaction, if there is even lack of interaction between, for example, the World Bank, the regional development banks, the UN organizations, even within the UN, between the UNDP, ITU, and so on. I mean, we have bilaterals. So the architecture or the ecosystem that we have today is siloed and is not really, doesn't create the kind of synergy that is needed. And if you look at digital transformation as an ecosystem, it involves many stakeholders and many sectors. So what the WHO or what the FAO or what the UNDP or what the ITU is doing in this area, this field, they should be in the bank and the other agencies should be interacting with them and have the kind of forums that allow this kind of synergy to flourish.
Thank you, Nagy.
Brian, do you have your chat on? I sent you a message.
Okay,
I think
thanks, Mark. So yeah, sorry, Nagy, do you want to add something else?
no, I just see. Is it Anil? Anil, are you talking to the group or what?
No, I think he's talking to another person, maybe in
Oh.
his house or his phone.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, no worries. Okay, so yeah, I think we can start closing since we are almost on top of our time. But Nagy, thank you very much for all this insightful conversation. And I think that not only your talk, but after all the questions from the PCI community, just walk us through many different areas of the same topic, that is this economic development and all this digital transformation. So thank you everybody for your participation and for just your curiosity or your different points on the different topics. Nagy, would you like to share any final remark on your side regarding this call and your book that is just being launched shortly or soon?
Thank you so much. I thank you all for very eloquent questions and comments, and I learned a lot from it as well. And I would like to encourage you, if you can, to have the time to read any of the two books that are just coming out. I have many other books, but they are becoming quickly out of date. You are in a field where publishing is too slow by comparison to the change that's going on in this area. So, but at the same time, I worry that particularly among colleagues in the bank is that as we get younger generation, they often forget or discount or are unaware of lessons learned from the past, and so go and reinvent the wheel or believe that this time it's going to be quick. And but this is a marathon, not a sprint. It is going to be a long process, and every other year we are going to face new technologies in this area. So it is important to learn about the new, but also not forget the lessons, the hard lessons from the past. Thank you so much all. Thank you.
And I want to thank Schneider Alfonso for being such a great host today.
Yes.
While our house became improved, right, during the time. And Nagy, thank you so much for being with us, right? So thanks to Nagy, thanks to Schneider, and in everything you do, ask better questions, guys. Cheers.
Thank you all, and feel free to call if you want to, or to send me any email. That would be wonderful. Take care.
Outstanding.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.